Hello friends, kind strangers, assorted creatures, welcome to the Demiurge Diaries. Know what else is collectively owned? The self. Here's a pet belief system that I perceive to be entirely obvious, but that I've had really mixed results selling my friends on. The person that is you does not exist in your head, at least not entirely. It exists in the public consciousness, in locations and objects. Let's take a step back, because I really want you to believe this, to grok it. I think our media landscape is already borderline inhospitable to people who don't. Wildly, as of a week prior to this re-recording, beloved political analyst Naomi Klein, of all people, has joined in, stating that the world has grown unbearable to individuals, in the context of her new book, Doppelganger. Kind of making my point for me in the act alone, the socius incubating ideas through whatever neuron clusters are available. Mine, yours, hers, doesn't matter. But if you can't be you, what's the alternative? Remember, all philosophy is primate psychology at the end of the day, meaning that this is about monkey brains. When monkeys use a tool to reach for things, their brain scans indicate that the tool is treated as an extension of the body and not a separate object. That makes sense, right? We perceive our limbs as ours, even when they're numb. Their material is replaced, they change shape. There's no clear boundary to what our body is, so the brain doesn't bother to construct such a thing. Your body is everything you can use. Alternatively, your flesh arms are tools like any other. Smartphones are a technological augmentation plugging you into pan-human memory banks. You are a cyborg. Same for clothes, it's just fur replacement. Don't worry about it. That's anchor 1. Anchor 2, a technology, in philosophy, can refer to a mode of thought, a purpose-fulfilling idea object, something you can use. Anchor 3. Consciousness, personhood, evolved because it was somehow beneficial. It helped us survive, spread the genes and memes which got us here, where here is some wildly peculiar configuration of bones, thoughts, and viscera. Feeling anchored? Good. Here's the thesis. Personhood is a communicational tool which is necessarily only partially internal. You can never have a perfect grasp of another self, but you can talk to others about them, using your internal model of them. We can either claim that this is a communicational mismatch, that the self and the self model are not the same thing, and that we are deluding ourselves into thinking we are having a useful conversation about a shared topic. But it doesn't feel that way. Does it? It doesn't feel that way because the self includes the self-model. The arm includes the rake. My friends can tell me whether I would like or not like a piece of art because their model of me can process that bit of info and output a resonance assessment just like my real brain could. They can make confident guesses about what my response to a certain argument might look like. To be ever so slightly facetious about it, we are all children of God if and only if we can really answer the question, what would Jesus do? We would only know if we contained him, if we could model him, if we were him. Thought is outsourceable. There are you sub-processes running everywhere around you. If you're a celebrity, it is very likely that there is more thinking occurring inside of you splinters than in your personal mind at any given moment. You don't even own most of you. Yourself has escaped you into the collective unconscious. That's where the image obsession comes from. There's a neurotic human impulse to keep the self in line, and that becomes a public process once your identity has infected the anthropic information network. Feel free to slot this thought into the last one. The self is an artistic performance and it belongs to anyone who chooses to do something with it. Feel free to steal me. IP abolitionism doesn't stop at my cranium. Take what you need and create. Use my skull and its contents as a tool, preferably as a battering ram. Just like Scorsese is a character in the metafiction of Goncharov, Jean Genet is a character in Blood and Guts, and, due to Kathy Acker's very cool, valid and flagrant plagiarism, also a partial author of it. Genet the meat person has no control about either, and why would he, since Acker is writing about the fragment of Genet that exists in her, advancing the communal fiction that is identity along a narrativized offshoot. Serial Experiments Lane is an anime about how we don't own ourselves. 1976's Network is a film about how we don't own ourselves. The Locked Tomb makes it a point that you are who you eat, and the identity horror inherent to that, while immediately undercutting anything extraordinary about the woes of obsessive war, with the claim that more fundamentally you already and inextricably are who you meet, who you love, who you hate, who you learn to model. The soul is permeable, it rubs off, it is nothing but the rubbing off. There are only so many steps you can walk in someone else's shoes before the ship of your identity starts looking distinctly Thesean, and no one can live a life in their own shoes exclusively. At least I wouldn't call it life. Bleed into the socius of cultural production. Kant was wrong. We can all mutually be tools and ends to each other at the same time, and it will be great because we are already no more than tools to ourselves. You are a thought being had by humanity, an idiosyncrappy diffuse spectre, arm rake. Once you get that far, you can maybe jump over that pesky shadow you cast, and believe me, it's not nearly as long as it looks, because identity really isn't all that important in the first place. It's chicken shit compression artifacts on thought. Ew. Yuck. All those bits of selfhood we tend to cling to, pretending like we are localizing ourselves within culture, are no more than a thin patina across the ideas and processes that we are part of. An experiment in applied philosophy, the vast computations and contemplations of the macroorganism to which we are no more than a neuron. If this is unintuitive to you, I suggest popping a psychedelic and getting back to me afterwards. Art. That's another great cognitive technology. The best one, you might say, and I might agree, and then we'd make out behind the oil paintings. I got around to playing Milk Outside a Bag of Milk Outside a Bag of Milk, finally. The sequel to that little indie game I made a proper video about. Watch that, please, I'm quite happy with it. Originally, I forced myself to get the piece out before I played any further, because I had one very simple thing to say, and I didn't want to dilute that with a whole other game. I also feared that the project might spiral into something so big that I wouldn't care enough to actually finish it, whereas the price we pay for milk could be made in a day. Anyway, in retrospect, that was probably the right course of action. Moabomb is a very different game from Miabomb, and while I have more to say about it, I have nothing to say about it at an equivalent volume, because Moabomb is like a video game? Miabomb is blunt force trauma applied directly to the cerebral cortex. Let's be clear, Moabomb is a better game. It is utterly stunning, there's a whole ass animation at the start, the internal monodialogue is more lively, but it didn't make me feel existentially disgusted with myself. Some nuance is added to the formula by giving the player sometimes exclusively bad choices and sometimes exclusively fine ones, or by having the distinction be less obvious. Null wants you to be silent sometimes and not other times, and I can't quite decide if that's a nice bit of gradation added to the point of the previous game, or if it's simply abandoning the mechanic. Pain and nuance don't mix well. Makes it too cerebral to really shatter you. Again, this isn't bad, the game doesn't need to pull the same trick twice. But it doesn't have another similarly essayable twist, except maybe the default ending, which speaks for itself. Null dreams of a story broadly similar to that of the first game, except this time she's the caretaker, and moreover she's a caretaker who fails despite trying to help. Something dealing with mentally ill people is difficult. Anyone who pretends like it isn't is either virtue signaling or woefully out of touch. Most likely both. Helping is often painful and unrewarding, but you should of course try anyway. Cool message. Don't be the type of conceited douche who thinks they can just fix a person when their entire brain chemistry is working against them. It's condescending. These are interesting, but their effect is less visceral. Anyway, here's one tangent I do want to briefly talk about. Hamsters. Null compares going online as an experience akin to hamsters being ripped out of the ground and put into a pet store. The store is more comfortable, but your cage is transparent to countless other hamsters. Hamsters who have, according to Null, always been there, though real netizens probably haven't, of course. They have always been there because they are not real people, and Null calls them her friends because they share her interests despite them not knowing who she is. Null feels watched, in part because someone once leaked a bunch of information which she was conned into revealing, and thinking of the actors involved as inhuman is probably part of a defense mechanism. But I can't help but feel that her experience was already highly voyeuristic, or she wouldn't claim that none of them knew who she was. She feels like a hamster in a glass cage, in part because she sees everyone else as a hamster in a glass cage. Something to quietly observe, so why wouldn't she be quietly observed? Something real human connections, you know my shtick by now, but this treatment of persons as entertainment media rather than interactable agents draws its tendrils deeply through any form of artistic expression. It draws its tendrils through Network, which is on the surface about this screen-mediated dehumanization, and on the subsurface about the dehumanization of those natively cued in to the nature of the dehumanization. Also through Prologue to Actualize, which is a gradual breaking down of the glass cage by revealing its filter functions, revealing how mediums trap us, turning art from a dissociative into a connective mode by bashing your soul against it. It also ties into the way my writing looks. I can't help but feel like I make myself less interactable by turning thoughts into essays. I might add nuance, but I subtract warmth. When I tell my friends to write blogs, am I telling them to stop being people and become media for me to consume? If personhood is already an outsourced mode of artistic expression, and we are all dearly loved tools to each other, why would there even be a difference? And if there is no difference, then why does it feel so gross? My guess is this. Being allowed a fleshed-out understanding of a person is a show of trust. Making that knowledge publicly available is a savage breach of said trust. The Beginner's Guide is a great game about that idea. Art is art and people are art, but some of that art is only for you or only for friends, because you do not want to force someone to dissolving the self-construct into the maelstrom of public consciousness. Butchering yourself open is a decision one shouldn't make lightly, but if you see someone butcher themselves open, don't applaud. Don't take photos, don't silently stare through the glass at the hamsters. Talk to them. They're probably doing it because identity, being closed, has become unbearable. Connection needs an opening, rarely pretty, never sterile. I make art not to obviate the need for real communication, but to augment and improve it, to teach each other about our lenses. So, when I lie here, splayed open, then I ask of you nothing less than to step into the shambles of my form and use it like a biomech. Thought technologies. We can talk about it later, but we have to talk about it. We need to turn the internet from a dissociative into a connective technology by bashing our souls against it. It is already both. We just have to use it right. Don't stare. Talk. Answer.